How's it going, folks? Know it's been a while since I've done anything like this, so might be a little rusty. Off at college, so you know how that goes. Picked up a few books, plus been reading on during my spare time. I've got a pile over there, pile on my desk, a whole crate of them. But one of them that I picked up was this, right? And the reason I picked it up was because it seemed like a reasonable example of alternate history. There's a lot of alternate history that's written for Wallace. Obviously, you know, alternate history as a massive genre has existed forever. What was it? Harry Turtledove, you know, one of the major popularizers of it, or I forget the gentleman who wrote it, but something like Man in the High Castle or Plot Against America. Fantastic books. Fantastic. Well, Turtledove is a little more like if you want to just read something for fun, but I digress. Anyhow, getting off topic. Robert G. Morris wrote this, which I'll just read you this. It's from Des Moines, so Iowan, fellow Iowan, same as Wallace, right? Has a PhD in physics from Iowa State University. He did some research. He joined the Foreign Service in '74. Was a member of nuclear nonproliferation, which, hey, Wallace would have loved that. Scientific cooperation and environmental protection issues in Washington, Paris, Bonn, Buenos Aires, and Madrid. He retired in 1992, and I haven't checked if he's still alive or not. Lives with his wife in Oregon. So this came out in 2008. So this is first term Obama, right? Which you would think would somehow contribute to this being like one of those timelines where you kind of see an idealized form of Wallace, if you were where I'm coming from. It doesn't really happen. This is perhaps the saddest example, and I've read some shitty alternatehistory.com threads. If you ever want a fun one, go on there and look for the one where it has Norman Rockwell Lincoln. Terrible, shitty person. Not a good guy, not someone to look up to. Killing Wallace, that is perhaps one of the worst interpretations of Wallace I've ever read to this day. And I've seen a lot of shitty takes, but like the people who just go, oh, Wallace was a communist, those guys have nothing on the Rockwell assassination timeline. It's bad. Just maybe I'll leave a link in the description because it's fucking it's awful. It's awful. But anyhow, so what does Morris change? So let's run through that. So he changes. Well, okay. We'll start at the point of divergence. His point of divergence is, again, as most Wallace timelines are, the 1944 DNC. Makes sense. A lot of opportunity, right? Excuse me. Leaves you wide open to use Pepper's charge, which I've probably talked about it in short, but basically during the 1944 DNC, Claude Pepper, senator from Florida, realizes that there's a massive crowd swell. Wallace very well could be renominated. He's aware of the party politics going on behind the scenes to get rid of Wallace. But Pepper supports Wallace. He likes Wallace. He's keen on seeing him for another 4 years. So he decides, okay, I'll call for a voice vote. Bad news, Florida microphone's dead. He can't call for a voice vote. He has to go up to where Samuel D. Jackson and, Robert Hannigan are up at the podium. Bad news, there's 35,000 people in the stadium, which was way more than it was meant for, so he's pushing and shoving through the crowd. He was, if I recall correctly, 3 feet away when it was Jackson, when Jackson called to adjourn. So, not brilliant. So, Wallace obviously doesn't get renominated. So, Morris, interestingly, doesn't use Pepper's charge. He just has Jackson grow a spine out of nowhere, which makes no sense because at this time Jackson, he needed party favor. Unless I'm flipping him with Robert Hannigan, which I do that sometimes because they're just wildly unremarkable, to be honest with you. I think it was Hannigan who he made the joke, on my grave, the only thing I want inscribed is the man who stopped Henry Wallace from becoming president. But I digress. Which is interesting because where was I going? Right, sorry, scatterbrained. But I think there's more kind of candid style of conversation. You guys get a more kick out of it, so it's fine. Basically, Jackson grows a spine out of nowhere, allows a voice vote to happen by just recognizing the crowd, because when he called to adjourn, the way it works is it was a voice vote to adjourn, right? So you've got 35,000 people chanting, "We want Wallace, we want Wallace," right? And then you've got a few people in the crowd working for Truman or working for a favorite son candidate. And he says, for the A's, right? And then people, 35,000 people scream, "Yes, yes," right? And then for the nays, few people, right? Drastically less than necessary to adjourn. It adjourns anyways. He says that it adjourns, which in our real world, that got quite the reaction from the 35,000 people. Mostly no, which there's a few surviving audio recordings. It's fucking bad shit. Eventually, when I do the video on Wallace, I'll put that in there at some point because it's bad shit insane. But before I get any more off topic, instead, Morris just has Jackson acknowledge the A's, which, okay, all right, I'll give it to you. It's fine. You wanted to change it up a little bit. Maybe you just didn't want to go with the generic divergence point. Fine, I will give it to you. So, how are we going to make Wallace unique? We're not. We're going to spend about 15 pages. No, granted, this is a very short book. Very thin, right? Compared to something like Benn Steil's The World That Wasn't, it's small. It's, I think, 130 pages. Yep, 130. But there's zero creativity to it, to be honest with you. It basically says he does everything that Truman does, more or less. Oddly enough, it has him resign the office of presidency to a unnamed, unknown, moderate, not moderate Republican, not moderate Democrat, moderate. Just a moderate. Truman wins the nomination in 1948. And quite frankly, it's fascinating because Wallace still goes his separate way, right? But despite the fact that he's just been president, he doesn't take any of that groundswell in, right? None of that groundswell, none of the fact that he would have been an incumbent World War II winning president, right? Which, granted, that didn't necessarily help Truman either, because the interwar years from about 1946 to 1949 were rocky. There was the housing crisis, there was the food crisis, there was the price control issue. A lot of problems going on. I acknowledge that. But let's go to the results page, right? Let's go to the results page. Oh, it also has, he also talks about Wallace's cabinet. One of the few things he goes into detail on is Wallace's cabinet, but it's also just the most batshit cabinet I've ever read. I don't have it, like, pulled up right now, and I'm not, because it's split, like, across two or three chapters, and it's very sporadic. I have it fully written, well, it doesn't even list all of the cabinet members, but it's very sporadic. But if we go and look at this page, right? This page right here is the results page. Now you're going to see some down on the bottom there, right around, oh, where the hell is it? It's hard to see when it's backwards. All right, so right about there, right? Is it, God, looking at this backwards is so weird. You'll see something like 2.83%. There we go, my big fat finger was covering it. Or 2.38%, sorry, which was really 2.37%, but I digress. That's the real world margins. These are all the real world margins. So earlier on, right, in 1944, when the still united Wallace and Roosevelt ticket run, same EV count. I checked because I was like, okay, maybe he changed up the map a little bit, you know? I wonder what weird, wacky combinations of states that I can make out of his changed EV total. Didn't change the EVs. Same EVs that Roosevelt and Truman got, right? Which, all right, fine. Admittedly, it wasn't thought that Wallace would give any boost in the farm states or the Great Plains states, so fine. I'll let you sit on that. But this is just, I mean, this is just sad, Morris. God bless you, you did great. And I'm like, I haven't fucking written a book. I'm not published. But it's honestly a little sad. Because you started out strong. You had your point of divergence set, right? That's step one. you had your interstitial period. Okay, a little bit rough. We're not getting some details here. We've got at least the cabinet. We know that he made some similar decisions to Truman. A lot of vague detailing still. We know that Taft is still very oppositional. But beyond that, you had the same candidates nominated. You had the same electoral results. You had the same popular vote margins. Nothing changed. Nothing. And it's sad. It's sad because this could have been so interesting. This is the beauty of Wallace. You've got so many ways you can go on it, right? But I will give him this. It is not a hit piece. It is fair and candid to him, mostly because it doesn't change anything. It's still the same historical results, which I think it's a little bit bullshitty because, like, if an incumbent president resigns, right, on good terms, he's still going to have some of that groundswell support, right? Honestly, I don't think without the party backing that kind of got Truman where he was in 1944, that we would have seen, like, in this timeline, in this world that Morris has created, I think Truman would suffer. So would the Democratic Party. Honestly, the fact that he has Truman still winning astounds me. Because the thing is, you would have to imagine, the split would be much worse, right? Especially because he still throws in Strom Thurmond, right? So it lacks imagination, which, you know, who am I to judge? I haven't published a book on Wallace. But let's talk about another book. Because it's at least tolerable. It's not great, but I don't regret reading it. I regret buying it, but I don't regret reading it. This, I regret buying and I regret reading. Because I would sooner squat into a spinning lawnmower blade than continue reading this, which I'm going to have to. I've got about 200 pages left, and I'm not looking forward to it because, frankly, what Steele's written here, it's not a history. It's not a biography. I read the Amazon reviews, right? Got bored, read the Amazon reviews. One of them is from Wallace's grandson, which is comedy gold. Just absolutely shits on Steele. But one of the comments on it, oh God, what was it? Because Jesus, hold on. Let me remember. Please hold. Oh, right. One of the worst comments I saw on it said that this right here should be considered the Wallace biography. So I take great issue with that because if you want the Wallace biography, then there is one option, and it is John C. Culver's, or is it, John C. Culver and John Hyde's American Dreamer. It's fantastic. And mostly, you know why it's fantastic? It's a comprehensive biography, right? It talks about his time as agriculture secretary. It talks about his mysticism. It talks about the Rorich affair. It talks about his time acting as an ambassador to South America and how that went fantastically, right? The longest chapter in this is on the Rorich controversy, right? Long story short, Rorich was a Russian mystic, right? Who Wallace, for a while, followed, right? A lot of influential people did. Actually, even Roosevelt, to some degree, would hear him, but not nearly to the extent Wallace did. Wallace is, by all means, what we would call a modern-day mystic. But the thing is, Steele doesn't acknowledge that as a wider part of him. Culver and Hyde, the way they address his mysticism is the fact that he had a religion. He was technically Presbyterian. But the thing is, he, in a way, drifted, right? He explored spirituality as an extension of his understanding of himself. Kind of like Jim Henson had a non-denominational funeral because he never really settled on religion, even though he was born Christian Scientist and raised Christian Scientist, which may or may not have contributed to his death, but I'm getting off topic. The thing is, this completely skips over his time as Ag Secretary, right? And what it does mention of it, outside of the Rorich controversy, because there was the Rorich expedition to China, which was still successful, something Steele doesn't acknowledge. The Rorich expedition was still successful, still brought home the seeds and plant samples that Wallace wanted and the agriculture department wanted, right? But it ignores that in favor of bashing Wallace for 62 pages straight, which really this whole book is, it's a sloppy hit piece, is what this book is. And again, I'm not published. I'm not an economist who's won an award. You know, apparently he's got a really great book on Keynesian economics and the whole fight to support that, right? I'm not an economics guy, but I am assuming because he's an economist, it's great. But this is not it. This is not a good book. A few people have had to hear me rant about it while I've been here. This is what a good biography looks like. But, anyhow, the thing with it is, if it gave Wallace any benefit of the doubt, I'd be willing to swallow it as a more critical examination. But it's not, a lot of it is just, well, Wallace might have done this. Wallace probably would have done this, without really much reinforcement. In fact, it's funny, because if you go in the back, and this makes the Amazon comment all the funnier, a lot of his sourcing is just from American Dreamer. You can check the bibliography section. It's a lot of it is still this, which granted, this is an older book now. I think this was 1987, maybe something like that. Let's see. Oh, well, no. I think he started working on it in 87 or something like that. But it was published in 01, which also makes this even more questionable, because if this came out 7 years after this edition, I don't know if it's the edition or if in general this came out in 01, makes this all the more sad, because it's like, you had this for 7 years and you pulled nothing from it. But I digress. It's a lot of it is just speculative. Oh, he would have rolled over the Soviets. He was a wannabe American Stalin, right? One thing he critiques a lot is in 1934, Wallace made the decision that the current hog population of the U.S. needed to be culled, right, to create artificial scarcity, which he was right. It worked. Him, alongside that, around the same time, he was working on passing the AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Act, which introduced the Crop Commodity Corporation. A lot of stuff the AAA did, which I think some parts of it were later found unconstitutional. It was a whole thing, right? Amazing piece of legislation. I personally love it. Anyhow. Steil doesn't seem to understand, or doesn't seem to care, that it was the logical, sound decision, which is kind of funny, because Republicans in 1936 and 1940 also had a real big issue with it, despite the fact that they were the ones who created the farm crisis. And you could actually buy pins during those campaign seasons that said, what was it? It was Hank HAW's raw deal, squeal 60,000 piglets, which, not 60,000, 6 million. 6 million piglets, which is, it's a funny pin, at least in my 2 cents. But again, it's unimaginative. It's just saying, well, it probably would have gotten worse if Wallace was around, or, well, we probably can blame Wallace for this, right? One thing that he really relies on is during his trip to China, not the Roach expedition, but a later trip he took. He mentions, Stedelmeyer, right, got replaced by so-and-so. I can't remember the commanders' names off of the top of my head, in China, right? Because the advisors there told Wallace that he should change him out, and so Wallace listened to them and sent the request to Roosevelt to have the commanders switched. Are we going to blame Wallace for this? Me, personally, I say he listened to the advisor. Now, granted, should he have visited Stedelmeyer, or I think it's Wedelmeyer, Wedelmeyer, one of the two. Should he have probably visited him? Yes, because he only visited one of the guys, and it was the Flying Tigers guy, whose name starts with a C, but I can't remember it. He didn't visit Wedelmeyer, which arguably he would have liked Wedelmeyer way more than he did the other guy, but, hindsight being 2020, what it is, He listened to the people he listened to the information he had. China was making zero progress, so it made sense. Change the command out, see if that fixes anything. And sure enough, not even a year later, you have the Dixie mission, where American observers finally get to go to the Chinese communist camps and see, okay, how's the fight against the Japanese going? Excuse me, I just had dinner. And it's like, you had so many opportunities to acknowledge just once, maybe once, Wallace was right. And you don't. You never give the guy credit. Right? His time as agriculture secretary, right? Gives him no credit for that. Right here, this is, you know what this is? This is a letter March 27th, 1950. This is a letter that a woman from, excuse me, I believe that's Connecticut. No! Cleveland! Shit! I've been reading the wrong section. There's a CT at the bottom, but I think that's just her first initials. No, this is from fucking Cleveland, Ohio. Wow, what a fucking small world. Anyhow, at the top, let me read this to you. Dear Miss Detmer, about a quarter of a century ago, I started the Pioneer Hybrid Corn Company. Last fall, one of the local salesmen in northeast Iowa gave me the enclosed pencil, which he himself had made up to help him in his sales effort. H.A. Wallace. Right? This is actually signed by him. Only passingly does Steil mention Pioneer Hybrid, right? Which is funny, because the first week I was here in North Dakota, you know what I got an ad for? Pioneer Hybrid. And you know why that is? Do you know who popularized hybridized corn? Do you? It's like you have so many chances to acknowledge maybe Wallace got things right occasionally, and Steil spends the entire time ignoring it. I haven't even reached the 1948 election yet, and I'm not sure I have the strength to, because it's so bad. It's genuinely awful. Not as bad as the alternatehistory.com timeline. That's fucking, nothing is ever going to beat that. That is God's worst timeline, which again, maybe I shouldn't be so hard on people, but in my opinion, which, hey, opinions are like assholes. We all got one. No one wants to see it, right? Or you get what I mean. But it's like, there's nothing productive to reading Steil's work. It's half-baked at best, and it's dog shit at worst, you know. It like, you can acknowledge that Wallace was naive a lot of the time, but you can't not acknowledge the fact that he was right, you know. Let me read you a little bit, which I'll get back to doing the audiobook version of this eventually. I just haven't had the time. But let me pull up in the rear end of this. Pause. Not like that. I ought to be better at this. Okay, here we go. Which, I probably shouldn't read this because I kind of want to do something cool with it, but it's fine, it won't ruin the moment later, right? A funeral service was held 2 days later at the Wallace's church, St. Stephen's Episcopal. Okay, anyhow, in Ridgefield, Connecticut. 300 people attended the simple 20-minute service and heard the rector read from the 46th and 121st Psalms. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. At his request, there was no eulogy, no sermon, no hymn. Wallace's body lay in a plain gray coffin, covered by a pall of crimson and purple brocade. The only flowers were sprays of his white gladioli and a red, white, and blue wreath from President Johnson. He died in 1965, so it would be Johnson at this time. A few of the old new dealers came. Former Postmaster General James A. Farley, we love Farley, was there. So were the statistician Louis Bean and Beanie Baldwin, who ran his 1948 campaign. Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, John W. Gardner, which is a real surprise, represented the president. A clump of teenagers watched the long black limousines pull beside the church and wondered what could have drawn them to Ridgefield. Who was he? One of them asked. The body was cremated in Bridgeport and the ashes flown to Des Moines. We'll make that trip eventually. There was another memorial service held on November 21st and a burial in the family plot at Glendale Cemetery. Many a verbal brick had been thrown at Henry A. Wallace during his robustly unquiet life, but in death, the words were kind. Lyndon Johnson called him an original American voice, whose views were not always popular, but they were sincere. Harry Truman, we don't love Truman in this household, called him an asset to the country, which is entirely different than what Truman said to him during his life. Most famously, there was a point where someone suggested maybe sending Wallace to Moscow to talk to Stalin, since they seemed at least like they might get along, which, to that whoever that was, credit, Wallace and Stalin probably would have gotten along. Did Wallace want to replicate Stalin's way of life? No. In 1950, he made that very clear in a public statement that he made about the Korean War. But he and Stalin probably would have had a very much Roosevelt and Stalin relationship, which is to say, a good one. But continuing along here. forgot where I was going with that. And so, at that suggestion, Truman said, I won't ask for the help of Wallace and his communists if it costs me the election. So, an asset to the country. Really, really playing it up there right at the end, eh, Truman? But whatever. And Thomas E. Dewey praised Wallace's unique contribution to the world standard of living, most notably the fact that agricultural productivity in Mexico was 14 times what it was in the 1930s at that point. What used to take 14 weeks labor was done in 14 days, something like that. It's literally the reason there was a green revolution in Mexico was thanks to Wallace. The reason there was a Rockefeller Center down there thanks to Wallace. Would Steele tell you this? No. No, he wouldn't. But anyhow, I'm getting pissy, so probably should keep moving. Glenn Taylor, who sacrificed his public career to run with Wallace, reminded the nation that a prophet had fallen. Practically everything Wallace advocated then has been acted on since. That's the way it is with people who are in the vanguard. Dr. Paula Mangelsdorf, there we go, head of the Harvard University Botanical Museum, commented, it was Wallace's fate to often be regarded as a dreamer when actually he was only seeing, in his own pragmatic, realistic way, some of the shapes of things to come. And more often than not, he was right. History cannot ignore him, and we shall not forget him, said Secretary of Agriculture Orville Freeman. No single individual has contributed more to the abundance we enjoy today than Henry Wallace. Again, true, which, granted, it's also led to some side effects. Row farming had to be popularized, mostly because of Wallace's introduction of hybridized corn to the general public. Downside of row farming, it really destroys the environment. Wallace advocated heavily for acreage reduction, soil rotation, and crop rotation, which there was two forms. So soil rotation was, hey, grow a field of clover, sow it under, let the soil get back its nutrients, then plant a new crop, right? Which any farmer will tell you that. I've spoken with a few, they'll all tell you that. It's shit. You can go on YouTube and find fucking... If you wanted to start your own farm, any guide is going to say, make sure that you don't keep planting the same crop year after year without letting the soil gain its nutrients back, because then there will be nothing for it to grow off of, right? That's how the Dust Bowl happened in the 1930s. And also partially because at that time there was not the break, the tree breaks, but getting off topic. Because we don't practice to the degree we should some of those things, row farming does have a destructive effect on the environment, but Wallace couldn't have known this. It was too soon to really see the effects of it, right? There wasn't another great Dust Bowl. There was no real signs of this soil degradation outside of usual fluctuations in crop. But I digress. Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey, which, reading a great book on hymns, a sometime admirer and sometime adversary, it's an interesting history, offered a tribute Wallace himself would have treasured. Henry Wallace was a scientist and a statesman, a politician and a philosopher, who was devoted and dedicated to peace. But above all, he was a good man. You want to know where you'll find none of those words? You want to know where you'll find none of those words? Probably in here. You know, let's just take a piece. Let's take a piecey, right? It is convenient. The one thing I'll give him is he has a cast of characters section, because he doesn't usually spend a lot of time explaining who people are. So it does come in handy. Sometimes you need to check that if you don't know who they are. But let's see here. That's fascinating. This is literally just what Eleanor Wilson said. Yeah. Okay. Apologies for the awkward jump cut there. Dorm mate came in and I didn't want to keep going while he was in here because that would be rude to his privacy. But let's see here. Let's see. Yeah, like right here. So Wallace fucked up in 1948 by not. Basically, he said that the Czech coup, the communist coup, was kind of not our problem, which dog shit take on his part. Oh, so I don't agree with his. Let's see here. I also don't agree with Wallace's opinion on Israel, but for the 1940s, it made sense. But again, dark stain on him, the fact that he worked at a settler colony during his trip to Israel. Excuse me. But, like right here, right? Just to give you an example. Let's see. I just had it. These beliefs changed in 1949, Wallace explained in his by now tidy, well-practiced account. No benefit of the doubt. No, oh hey, maybe a guy's opinions change. Or, oh hey, maybe a guy realized that something was dog shit. None of that. None of the affordances of saying, oh, okay, maybe he realized that he was wrong. No, it's a tidy and well-polished account. When he learned the truth behind the Czech coup, I lost faith in Russia's intentions. After that, he explained, they smashed a truly democratic regime there and installed a totalitarian government of their own. He was pressed on it by an interviewer at some point. Here we go. Maybe I was ahead of my time. Wallace finally lobbied in self-defense after considerable thought. Maybe, he seemed to say, it was not that he had been. Maybe it was just. God, fuck me. Maybe he seemed to say it was not that he had seen the truth too late, but that he had seen the opportunity for peace too early before the establishment was ever capable of grasping it. The interviewer was skeptical, didn't see the need to press about it. Clearly, peace and politics were, for Wallace, qualitatively different subjects. He could never renounce the striving for one, even as the other failed to deliver it. Again, no benefit of the doubt here. Starts talking about the onset of his ALS. Okay, I'll give you credit for that. Wholly in character, Wallace sought out treatments from the unorthodox to the radical, which is true. Wallace basically made himself a guinea pig for ALS. That's something even Culver notes, and it's actually a quote from Wallace. But let's see here. Yep, did that. He died so young. He was a kid, man. 77. Still a kid. Yep. This is about what I expect. Yeah, here's a line. And given Stalin's designs on Turkey, Iran, Greece, Germany, Manchuria, and Korea, the only alternatives to Cold War were hot war and appeasement. Not really. We did stiff the Soviets a fucking lot. We stiffed them incredibly. So, for example, post-war, there was a proposal to give them $6 billion at the time in 1945 dollars, which is a lot. I acknowledge that. That's a lot of money to help them rebuild, right? And this had been kind of a pre-agreed thing, but Truman and Marshall kind of reneged on it. So the Soviets got nothing, which not really a good way to treat the totalitarian dictator. You could argue that paying him would be the appeasement that Steil is talking about, but at the same time, if you kind of renege on a deal, is that really appeasement? Anyhow, let's see here. Yeah, here we go. In the 1950s, Henry Wallace came to acknowledge his earlier misapprehensions regarding Soviet expansionism, while still maintaining that peace had been possible, at least until 1948, on the basis of superior American power. Yeah, that's pretty fair, bud. The flaw in such reasoning is now apparent, given what we also know of Stalin's resolve to close the power gap, particularly through the rapid building of atomic bombs. Soviets' first test was in 1949. The first airdrop was in either 1950 or 1953. It took them a hot minute to get the bomb mounted to a plane, mostly because, as I think Oppenheimer might have said it, basically what they were doing was shoving it in an ox cart and using it. But let's see here. It is the colorful career of Henry Agard Wallace. If the colorful career of Henry Agard Wallace shows anything clearly, it is this: that, as the ancient Stoic philosophers recognized, success in life requires confirming desires to realities. One can neither will corn to higher yields, nor will a dictator to compromise. So, let me ask you this. What was the entire backbone of Roosevelt and Stalin's relationship? Oh, right, it was that Roosevelt would give an inch, and Stalin would interpret that as the whole mile, and in reality, it was the compromise solution that Roosevelt was giving him, but Stalin was still happy with it, which, granted, they have a really odd relationship. At some point, I'm going to read into that more. Wallace accepted the former and labored within the timeless laws of genetics. He denied the latter and labored beyond the timeless principles of statesmanship. The results were predictable: success as an agriculturist, failure as a statesman. We have reaped the blessings of his success. May we learn from his failures. So, Steil, God bless you. I really wish you all the best, Steil. But why do you spend this whole book dog shitting him, right? We're not, like, you even acknowledge, you talk about his South American trip and talk about it exclusively as a failure. Or at least, even when he has a success, you usually say, oh, but this country wasn't happy. And it'll be Argentina that wasn't happy about it. You know, the ones that kind of said, oh, hey, Nazi Germany, you got like some guys coming over, that's cool. Which, granted, we're also guilty of, Operation Paperclip. But this is alternate history that, while not creative, is at least fair. It's a stretch to call this alternate history, really. It's a biography with speculative history features. But as Henry Wallace's grandson said of the book, it may as well be called the Henry Wallace that wasn't, because it's dog shit. And nothing I've ever read has made me so frustrated as that. So, I think this is like 40 minutes of me rambling. So I hope you enjoyed catching up with me and seeing what dog shit I'm reading. Take care out there, and remember, compassion conquers. So fuck yeah. Be safe.